All right. I think we are live. Hello, hello, hello. Are you there? Awesome. Okay. Checking the control panel here. I can see people flooding into the room. It's my favorite part of the webinar. I love that. And yet, at the same time, you might notice if you go to the chat thread that I've muted it, which is unusual. I know people often leave it live, but as a psychology professor, I know the research on this. It turns out that when you have a situation of multitasking happening, not only does it create a performance deficit in terms of you're just not going to retain as much, but it actually kills your enjoyment of the experience. So I plan to have fun here for the next little while. I want you to have fun. I think it's going to be some cool stuff. I think you'll enjoy learning about it. So I've muted the chat thread so that we can all just focus. Otherwise, my eyes keep going over there, and it's so addictive over there. So you'll notice that. Hopefully, you can see and hear my slides. I have a friend who's on the webinar here, Stephen, and he's texting me that he can see and hear. That's always a good sign. Thank you, Stephen. And yeah, okay. So we're just going to go ahead and launch in and get started. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So this is the badly behaving brain, why 2 billion people can't lose weight, and what you can do differently. And like I said, I'm Dr. Susan Peirce Thompson, and here I'll be talking a little bit more about my background and why I'm talking about all this stuff in a little bit. But first, an overview of this webinar. I'm going to start with an introduction, a reframing of the obesity pandemic. And then I'm going to get into, as a neuroscientist, what I think is really actually going on. Like, why exactly our weight, collectively speaking, keeps climbing. And also why not everyone's affected. Like, you'll notice there's people walking around in right-sized bodies seemingly unaffected by this toxic obesogenic food environment that we now live in. So what's up with that? How are their brains different than ours? And I want to, of course, talk about the solution, how to rewire the brain for sustainable weight loss. Everybody can lose some weight initially, but like sustainable weight loss is the unicorn that we're all searching for. And I want to talk about the solution to that. So let's start off with our reframing of the obesity pandemic. I don't know if you've seen this. It's been going around on the internet, but this is from just recent statistics that have been pulled worldwide. Take a look at this, starting in the date in the top left in the 1970s, and look at the percentage of obesity climbing. Notice that the Middle East actually gets dark before even the United States. That's because they drink so much soda in the Middle East, because it's hot and they don't have access to clean water so easily. But you can see as we march along. Yeah. Yikes, right? Okay, so this is where we're at, and where this goes is it's projected that by 2030, at the current pace, by 2030, 50% of Americans will be obese. 50%. So look at this legend here in the bottom left. 50% obese. That means we need to add a 35% and a 40% and a 45% and a 50% in not that long, 2030. And this is just going to keep marching and marching and marching. It's just shocking. Okay, so we've got a global obesity pandemic. And I'm not telling you anything you didn't know already. You'd have to be living under a rock to not know that, right? Clearly. And it's as bad as you think. We now have 2.1 billion people in the world overweight or obese. In the United States alone, 108 million people are on a diet. Now, they're not calling it a diet anymore. They're calling it a cleanse. They're calling it a detox. They're talking about eating clean. But this statistic actually comes from the U.S. weight loss and diet control market, which is a marketing report that comes out in odd years, every other year. And it measures how much money people are spending on trying to lose weight. So it actually measures are they buying books to lose weight? Are they, just actually putting their money where their mouth is? So there's more people than this, surely, that are trying to lose weight without, buying a book or whatever. They just decide to go eat, low-fat cottage cheese or whatever. But 108 million people are spending money actively trying to weigh less than they do right now in America. This number has been steady now for several years, for about 5 years. What hasn't been steady, what's been climbing radically, is that obesity is now a bigger problem in developing nations than malnutrition, by far. By far. And I don't know if you know this, but China and India actually lead the world in numbers of overweight people. Now, that's because their populations are so big, but you probably don't realize it, but there's actually more overweight and obese people in China and India than anywhere else in the world. And, and that situation continues to climb. The Middle East has the highest per capita rates of type 2 diabetes. Over 20% with actual type 2 diabetes, not pre-diabetes. I don't know if you know this, in California, 54% of people have diabetes or pre-diabetes in the state of California right now. 54% of people, study that came out from UCLA. And worldwide, 63% of people are dying from diet-related diseases, from, heart disease, stroke, diabetes. Things that, if we just changed the food that we put in our mouth, would subside. So, and it's going to get worse. Over the next 3 years, a new McDonald's will be opening in China every single day. Tick, 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 just. And over the next 20 years, according to the World Economic Forum, we're going to spend an estimated $47 trillion on diseases caused by the global industrial diet. We literally cannot afford to keep eating the way we're eating. Forget about the human suffering and the health consequences. We just can't afford it economically. We can't afford it financially. In the United States, it's crippling us. We're spending, 9-10% of our GDP on health costs that are mostly because of our excess weight. It's ridiculous. Now, what I want to do, though, because I don't actually usually think about this problem on this global scale. I'm not an economist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm a psychologist, and I'm a human being who has struggled with her own weight. So I think of this as a personal issue. And what shocks me is that the average dieter makes 4 or 5 new attempts each year. 4 or 5 new attempts each and every year. They don't even realize they're doing it that often. I remember when I was, in that hamster wheel, I didn't know that I was trying that often. Each time seemed fresh to me. It seemed like a new attempt. And I don't know if you know this, but of the obese, fewer than 1% will get slender in any given year. As a matter of fact, it's actually like 1/3%. It's like 1 in 306 people. There's a few studies that have come out on this now, and they all come up with about the same number. And of those less than a 1% who succeed in any given year, of those, almost all will regain that weight. Most or all of it. And some even more, right? So I just want to think about that deeply for a second, because people are trying hard to lose weight. Hard. 4 or 5 new attempts each year. What if we put this in a different domain? What if we talk about colleges and universities, graduating students? What if, instead of graduating classes of students, colleges and universities were only graduating 1% of the students who came out? 1%. And what if some investigative journalist dug a little deeper and found out that the other 99% of students were dropping out and then re-enrolling, and then dropping out and then re-enrolling 4 or 5 times each year? What would we think? Would we say, oh, those 99% of students are probably really lazy and they should get their act together, right? They should decide to change. Would we think that they're stupid and lazy, or would we think that there is something fundamentally flawed, deeply flawed with that entire system? So what I want to propose to you is not that we have an obesity pandemic. You already knew that. I want to propose that we have an obesity mystery. The problem itself doesn't even make any sense. People are trying left, right, and center and failing at rates that make no sense. It's not that hard to stop bending your elbow and stop, eating pizza. Like, it's not that hard. We all know that we should be doing it less. What is going on? Now, I ask these questions with such passion because this is a really personal thing to me. This is me. This is my husband. These are our three daughters. And I live in upstate New York, Rochester, New York, actually, Western New York. And yeah, my history with these issues goes way back. I struggled for so many years. I was chunky as a kid. You know, it's funny because I wasn't teased for being a fat kid. I was kind of just a little fleshy, just a little chunky, not so fat as to be teased as being a fat kid. But by the time I was 11 years old, I weighed more than I weigh now. Like me in that picture, I weighed more than that at 11 years old. And by the time I was 14 years old, when I was 14 years old, I took my first drug and I lost 7 pounds the night. It was mushrooms, and I lost 7 pounds that night. And that started 6 years of using drugs to try to regulate my weight. I almost never got slender actually from it, except for one time that I was really hooked on crystal meth, and then it morphed to cocaine, and then it morphed to crack cocaine. And I dropped out of high school. I just burned my life to the ground. Just burned my life to the ground. You can imagine the things I was doing for money to get those kinds of drugs on a regular basis. And I was 19 years old and spending most of my time in a crack house, living in San Francisco. When I was 20, just after my 20th birthday, I got clean and sober. And I haven't had a drink or a drug now for, 23 years or more, since August 9th of 1994. August 9th of 1994. And that's the biggest miracle of my life by far. I mean, those 6 years that I was living like that, it's just unlanguageable what I went through over that addiction. And what's interesting, though, is after I got clean and sober, food addiction took over. And I knew I would get fat after I stopped using drugs. I knew it. And sure enough, I just whacked on a ton of weight overnight. And at first, I was kind of okay with it because I was just so grateful for the nightmare that had become my life to have stopped. But pretty quickly, I was not okay with that weight. And 9 months later, I was marching myself down to a 12-step food program because I was working 12 steps for my drug and alcohol problem, and it was working for me. And I marched myself down to a 12-step food program, but it didn't really work the same way. And over the next 8 years, I just got heavier. Now, I wish I had a picture of me at my highest weight. I don't know if you've ever had a real weight problem, but I have no pictures of me at my highest weight. This is me at a size 16. I got up to a size 24, and I have no pictures of it. The reason I have this picture at all is because I was starting a 12-week bikini body challenge. And the grand prize was $100,000. And I was so determined that I really thought that I would win. I just finished running a marathon, actually, in this picture. Which is funny. I was overweight here, but I wasn't unfit. I'd actually just finished running a marathon, which is, and I lost like 10 pounds from running that marathon. It was such a ripoff. It's crazy. I ran like 40 miles a week for 6 months and I lost 10 pounds. Crazy. So I never finished the bikini body challenge. I never got an after picture. I took this professional before picture and I never got an after picture because I couldn't do the food plan. 6 small meals a day and a free day on Sunday. And I don't think the free day was supposed to be what I was doing with food on Sundays. I do want to pause here for a moment, though, and say it's not just about weight. It is not just about weight. Plenty of slender people struggle with their eating too. As a matter of fact, according to our research that comes out of our lab, 22% of slender people qualify as full-blown food addicts. So they're not overweight, but they're thinking about what they've eaten or not eaten, whether they're on their plan or off their plan, how many miles, how many calories, how many pounds. They're thinking they're going to have nothing for lunch today because they're about to go to a dinner party at night tonight, and they know they're going to overeat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they're purging, maybe they're using laxatives, maybe they're just exercising a heck of a lot. Maybe they're just young and their metabolism is fine and they're going to be overweight later, but 22% of people slender people qualify as full-blown food addicts. So I propose that we need a solution that addresses not just weight problems, but food obsession as well. And the solution is living happy, thin, and free. Now, I mean, how do you get there? Of course, that's what I'm going to talk about later, but thin by itself is pretty worthless. I was thin when I was doing crystal meth. I was also psychotic and dropping out of high school. And So thin is not the goal. There's lots of ways to get thin, including getting terminal diseases and doing drugs. But when you're happy, thin, and free, when it's earned, when it's from eating whole, delicious foods and living the right way, then that's the trifecta: happy, thin, and free. So that's our tagline, is happy, thin, and free. That's what we're aiming for here. Okay, and yay, this is me. I actually lost all my excess weight in 2003. So I've been slender now for, for a long time, and well over a decade, obviously. And going from obese to slender and keeping that weight off for over a decade is something that almost nobody does. I think the statistics are, this puts me in the top 1/100th of 1% of successful weight loss maintainers. 1/100th of 1%. It's crazy. And I'm going to tell you how I do it, how I did it, how I do it. I still do it. I mean, it's a daily thing. Once you've been obese, there's never like a where it's not, sort of a part of your life. You have to change the way you live. And I'm going to tell you what I do. And this is a part of my life and my work now. After I got clean and sober, I like I said, I dropped out of high school. So first I got my GED and I enrolled in community college. I did well there. I transferred to UC Berkeley and I got 4.0s there and spoke at the graduation when I graduated in 1997. I got a full ride to go anywhere I wanted and for grad school, and I chose the University of Rochester, which is in the top 3 schools in the world in my field, which is brain and cognitive sciences. And I study how addiction works in the brain, and food addiction in particular. And so I came out here. This is a picture of the University of Rochester. I'm still there. I have an adjunct associate professorship in the Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences there. After I graduated with my Ph.D., though, I did a 2-year postdoc at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, in psychology. And then I came back to the United States and I became a tenured psychology professor. And I started teaching a college course on the psychology of eating. And in this college course on the psychology of eating, I was teaching about the neuroscience of food addiction. And I was also, helping people to lose their excess weight and keep it off. I've been doing this now for a long, long time, helping hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, now thousands of people. I'm going to tell you about the online program that I started that has been sweeping the world, which is kind of crazy. But let's back up, because I want to tell you a little bit about the science. I want to tell you how the brain blocks weight loss. Like, what is the crux of the obesity mystery that I mentioned at the very beginning? Like, why are people trying so hard with so little to show for it? People who can do other things, people who can run a marathon, who can get a PhD, who can raise a family of kids, which is, I think, the hardest thing in the world to do, in my estimation. Really, the toughest job in the world is parent. And be kind, considerate, responsible human beings, and yet pledge to themselves that they will not eat certain foods or that they will follow a certain regimen and not be able to do it. What is going on there? Why are our brains letting us down like that? And what I think the core issue is, I propose to you, is that modern foods and modern patterns of eating have hijacked the brain, literally hijacked the brain. And now the brain is blocking weight loss. And there are 3 ways that this is happening. It has to do with willpower, it has to do with hunger, and it has to do with cravings. And I'm going to just cover those in turn. I want to give you a crash course in willpower, because if you think about it, people are pretty good actually in knowing what to eat and not to eat. And a lot of people are very good at it. Like, they've really made a study. As a matter of fact, in my experience, people with food issues tend to be some of the most nutritionally educated people in the world. They can tell you all kinds of things about what they should be eating and not eating. And even the average layperson, if you give them flashcards, they'll score upwards of 90% on the quiz, right? Donuts, no. Pizza, no. Salad, yes. Broccoli, yes. They're good at that. The issue is not in what do I eat or not eat. The issue is in actual implementation over the long term. It's really an issue of execution, right? It's an issue of, on the Friday night, after sitting in traffic all day, after a wicked week at work with the kids clawing at your ankles, can you, start getting produce out of the fridge to make a salad? Or are you going to turn to your spouse and say, let's order a pizza? right? Like that's the issue, is implementation over the long term. And this is an issue in the brain that has everything to do with willpower. So I want to give you a crash course in willpower. Willpower, it turns out, in the brain is like a rechargeable battery, but it only has 15 minutes of power at any given time. Can you imagine if your cell phone only had 15 minutes of charge? Like, you'd be dead. You'd be a sitting duck, right? There's no way to maneuver through life with a cell phone with 15 minutes of charge. But that's what our willpower is like. And it gets depleted, unfortunately, by all kinds of things, including just basic like working, checking email, decision making depletes your willpower. And checking email is nothing but a series of decisions. Do I respond to this? Do I file it? Have you ever stared at your email inbox and it's just so hard to wade through it because you're experiencing that willpower depletion? Sitting in traffic will do it, persevering on tasks, exercising, resisting temptations, regulating our emotions, which has everything to do with raising kids. That's why having kids in the mix is so challenging. To make it even worse, willpower is fueled by brain glucose. So when our blood sugars dropped, we're even more ineffectual at making a right choice when it comes to our food. This is all happening right here in the anterior cingulate cortex, right behind the prefrontal cortex. And this part of our brain just craps out on us like really easily. It just gets exhausted. And it creates what I like to call the willpower gap. So when you've got food choices to make, and you've been, under any of the sorts of stressors that just naturally make up a busy person's life in this day and age, you're likely to fall right into that gap, this huge gap between what you want to be doing with food, what you know you should do with food, with what you promised yourself you would do with food. What's in the best interest of your highest self, and then what you actually do. That gap is just, for most of us, pretty big a lot of the time. And I'm going to share with you the solution to that just a bit. But first, I want to tell you the other two ways that your brain is blocking weight loss. There's two poles that are in the mix here that make this willpower gap exponentially worse, as if it couldn't be bad enough with that willpower gap. We've got these other things in the mix, hunger and cravings. And I want to talk about hunger first. And I want to tell you that I'm not talking about like, oh, I haven't eaten in 6 hours and my belly is rumbling, I'm hungry. I'm not talking about that kind of hunger. I'm talking about this kind of hunger, this George Costanza eating popcorn mindlessly hunger. I'm talking about the kind of hunger that has you eat a full meal at dinner and then sit on the couch eating a bag of chips like he's eating that popcorn. And then you finish the bag of chips and you're now hunting in the freezer for ice cream. I'm talking about that kind of hunger. So the thing about this hunger is it's a new kind of hunger. It's insatiable hunger. It's not actually satisfied by eating, which real hunger is satisfied by eating. You get full and you push the plate away, you're done. But this kind of hunger is not satisfied by eating. Where is it coming from? This rat over here on the left has it. This guy here. Now, this little rodent was discovered decades and decades and decades ago, but they didn't know what was wrong with them. So they kept the strain alive, breeding the obese ones with the obese ones. They didn't know what was going on until about 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, they discovered that this little rodent is missing a gene, and the gene makes a hormone. And when researchers discovered this, they named the hormone leptin, which is after the Greek word leptos for thin. And this hormone leptin is a very important hormone. It's actually the crux of the obesity pandemic, is leptin. This is really the issue, is leptin dysregulation. Leptin is the hormone that tells your brain, I'm not hungry anymore, and I feel like exercising, I feel like getting moving. And this little guy has plenty of leptin. This little guy is missing the gene that makes leptin. So his brain never gets the signal to stop eating, and it never gets the signal to get active. And when researchers observe him in the cage, he doesn't move. He just sits there. Most rodents, they're like sniffing around and they're moving. They're frisky. You can even see this guy, right? He looks like he's on the move right now. He's about to bolt over this way. You can see that, right? He's on the move. This guy's not going anywhere. He's literally sitting there. The only way to get him to move is to move the food trough from one side of the cage to the other, and then he will slowly waddle over to the other side. It's kind of hilarious. But if you give him some leptin injections, that's all he needs. And he will stop eating, hop into the hamster wheel, start running around, and within like moments, he'll be looking like this guy. Literally, it's all he needed was a little bit of leptin. So researchers wondered, well, what's going on with us? Like, we need more leptin. They started injecting people with leptin, like the pharmaceutical companies did. They put leptin in pills. It didn't work. Nobody was losing weight. They injected people with leptin. It didn't work. They weren't losing weight. Then they just thought, well, let's see whether people are actually leptin deficient. And it turns out we're not. The fatter you are, the more leptin you actually have, which actually makes sense because leptin is made by the fat cells. So the more fat you have, the more leptin you have. They're like, well, wait a second. We're not like this guy. This guy doesn't have the gene that makes leptin. We do. We're making leptin hand over fist, but our brains can't see it. We have what's called leptin resistance. Leptin resistance. So we're not like those rats. They didn't have the gene that makes leptin, but we do. We have plenty of leptin. So the question is, why? What's going on? It's like a mystery, right? Why can't our brains see our leptin? And the answer is that the leptin is being blocked. It's called leptin resistance. Where is it happening? It's happening in two places, in the hypothalamus and in the brainstem. The leptin is being blocked. This is where eating behavior is regulated, and this is where your basic survival functions are governed. And these parts of the brain, once they get the signal that the sense that you're starving, which is what happens if you can't see your leptin, that you show all the physiological markers of starvation, boom, you're never going to be able to stop eating. You now have insatiable hunger. So the cause of leptin resistance, it turns out, now it took 10 years for this to get discovered. It was actually in the mid-2000s. Leptin was discovered in 1994, 1995, and then leptin, the solution to leptin resistance was discovered in the mid-2000s. And what's blocking leptin, it turns out, is insulin. Crazy. So you might know a little bit about insulin, right? It's got something to do with blood sugar. It's got something to do with type 2 diabetes and diabetes in general. Yeah, exactly. Now, I'm just going to leave you here with this takeaway. This is the key. We have to dramatically lower our baseline insulin levels. I'm not talking about the spike in insulin that comes when you eat a cookie. I'm talking about baseline insulin levels, and research shows that baseline insulin levels have been rising dramatically over the last several decades. They're like twice as high as they used to be in the 1970s. And through grade school, it doubles in our kids. It shouldn't be. It should be steady. But insulin levels, baseline insulin levels, are doubling in our kids. This is how we're setting them up for type 2 diabetes. This is how we know that half of our kids are going to have diabetes by the time they grow up. It's crazy. Okay, so we've got to dramatically lower our baseline insulin levels. Okay, so hold right there. Now we're going to talk about cravings. Okay, so cravings are generated by the dopamine reward pathway, and they have to do with motivation. Cravings are really about like, I gotta go get me some of that, right? It's like this motivating impulse, and it's this addiction, reward, motivation, pleasure pathway that includes the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens here. This pathway right here. The prefrontal cortex can rein it all in if we decide not to do something. But what happens is, in certain cases, the addiction kind of takes over, and the nucleus accumbens wins, and the craving just wins out, right? Okay, so what happens is, when you flood that part of the brain with too much dopamine, like let's say you do something that gives you an addictive hit, like you're gambling and you just won a big jackpot, cha-ching, you get a huge flood of dopamine. Or let's say you're watching pornography, which gives a huge flood of dopamine, like an unnatural flood of dopamine. Can you see how the sex that's depicted in pornography is just, it's not, we would never have access to that kind of sexual stimuli, 100,000 years ago. Like, we just wouldn't. It's unnaturally strong. And it's the same with a donut, right? Like, that's not food like we're supposed to be eating. It's unnaturally strong. and it creates this flood in the brain of dopamine. And what happens is the dopamine receptors there, they get blown out, essentially. They downregulate. They become less numerous, less responsive. Yeah, so like eating donuts is very similar to watching pornography, and it creates the same impact in the brain. So now we're rewiring the brain. We're reducing the number and the strength of the dopamine receptors, which is all fine and good because it's a good idea to do that. If we're just going to keep pummeling the brain with dopamine, it should downregulate just to get more balance on board. But now the trouble is, if you take away that excessive pleasurable stimulus, now you don't have enough dopamine on board naturally, normally. So now you're in a depleted state, like you feel itchy. You don't feel good. You feel like restless. You feel like you need something. And now you've got cravings on board to go get more. And I'm talking about more like every few hours, more like you need to top up. Now, what I want to say about this dopamine downregulation is that the brain can heal. But the key is you've got to stop flooding the brain with dopamine to let it heal. You've got to stop, right? So this brings us to a question, which is what floods the brain with dopamine and what raises insulin levels? These are the two keys here, right? Dopamine and insulin. And the answer is very simple, my friends. Very simple. Sugar and flour. Sugar and flour. I want you to think for a second about what drugs are. This is a drug. This is cocaine. I know something about this drug, and I've shared my history with you, so you know that I do. I do. Where does cocaine come from? It comes from the coca leaf. The coca leaf. And in the Andes Mountains, they chew the coca leaf and their cheeks get a little bit numb and they get a little lift that's maybe akin to drinking, half a cup of caffeinated tea. But there's actually a published paper that's come out that has demonstrated that it's not addictive. Nobody's getting addicted. Nobody's, use of coca leaf chewing is escalating. But if you take the inner essence of that coca leaf and you refine and purify it into a fine white powder, now you have cocaine. You've taken a plant and you've turned it into a drug. And I want to propose to you that that's not the only place that we do this. Let's look at this. What is this? This is heroin. So where does heroin come from? It comes from the poppy plant. Now, you can sit in a field of poppies all day long and eat poppies, and you won't get high, you won't get addicted. You will actually fail a urine test for opium. You will. But the only way to actually get the rush and to get addicted is to take the inner essence of that poppy plant and then refine and purify it into a fine powder. And now you've created heroin. You've taken a plant, a harmless plant, and you've turned it into a drug. And what is this? This is sugar. Where does sugar come from? It comes from all kinds of places. It comes from, I don't know if you realize, it comes from like sugar cane. It comes from beets. It comes from corn. There's lots of ways to make sugar these days. But in every case, the plant itself is harmless. It's when you take the inner essence and then you refine and purify it into this fine powdery substance that you've turned it into a drug. And what's this? It's flour. And look at how similar it is to the cocaine. It's like almost identical looking, right? And people often talk about wheat and they talk about gluten. And I know that some people have really genuine sensitivities or allergies. Celiac disease is a very real thing. But I'm not talking about wheat. I'm talking about any flour. I'm talking about taking a plant and extracting the inner essence of it and then refining and purifying it down into a powder. That is when you've turned it into a drug. So it could be potato flour or rice flour or almond flour or coconut flour, any kind of flour. You're taking, because what you're doing then is you're exponentially increasing the surface area that each molecule gets exposed to the digestive enzymes. And the fructose and glucose flood into the digestive system and hit it hard and fast. And now we're impacting insulin. Now we're impacting our brain. Now we're creating a dopamine rush. That's what does it. We're taking harmless, healthy plants and we're turning them into drugs. And in the brain, my friends, I'm just, as a brain and cognitive scientist, I'm just here to tell you that PET scans show that it's having the same impact as drugs, even maybe worse. So this is a normal brain. This is the nucleus accumbens right here. This is the red shows a healthy dopamine response to normal stimulation. Look, you should have a normal amount of pleasure on just an average good day. You're feeling fine here. A nice red response. If you've been doing cocaine a bunch, a normal day is not good enough, my friends. It's not good enough. You need a little something more because why? Your dopamine receptors have been blown out. See, you have no red left, quite a bit of yellow, but no red left. And you're not feeling good. This is a day, this is a lazy Tuesday afternoon where you need to go get yourself another hit. You need to go get yourself some cocaine. And look at the obese brain. Even less yellow, less green, less dopamine on a normal day. This person is off to get some donuts. Seriously, not to get high, to get normal. Just to get because if this person eats donuts, the response will look like this. That's what it'll look like. And it needs that stimulation on board just to get normal. Now, if you're wondering what foods people get addicted to, I mentioned sugar and flour. There's another way to do the assessment, which is just ask people, what foods do you drive across town in a snowstorm for, right? What foods do you crave? And the answer is cake, cookies, candy, ice cream, donuts, chocolate, pizza, chips, pasta, bagels, bread, crackers. It's sugar and flour. That's what people drive across town in a snowstorm for. That's what people, order out for when they're completely exhausted. That's what people look forward to. That's what they crave. And now we come to the part of this discussion where we need to ask, well, why isn't everyone affected? Like, given the willpower gap and given how brains interact with sugar and flour, and given that in the United States, at least 80% of the calories in the supermarket now have added sugar in them, why aren't we all obese? And why aren't we all crazy with food addiction? And the answer is that drugs don't affect every brain the same way, including these drugs up here, including heroin and cocaine. I don't know if you know this, but not everyone can get addicted to heroin and cocaine. Think I'm wrong? Okay, well, let's send 100,000 people home with a Vicodin prescription after a back surgery and have them take that Vicodin daily, heavily, until they experience tolerance and withdrawal, the classic hallmarks of addiction. But I don't think that's what addiction. I think addiction is using to the point of self-harm when you don't want to use anymore. At the end of the back pain, let's see who weans off that Vicodin prescription with no problem. I don't know if you know Vicodin is an opiate, right? So we're talking heroin here. We're right over here in this camp. We're giving people a heavy opiate. And at the end of the day, a lot of people wean off it with no problem at all. They can't wait to get off it. They feel better off it. Seriously. And some people can drink alcohol, which is addictive, and, not get addicted to it. And some people can smoke cigarettes here and there. Seriously, just at a party or at a concert, that's all. They don't want one the next day. Some people can drink caffeine here and there and not need some every day. So there's a range of addictive susceptibility. It also varies by the specific substance. And here's what research shows. Research shows that there is a susceptibility scale to addiction. Addictions of all kind, but I'm talking here specifically also about food addiction. So it's a scale, all right, from no susceptibility up to, I call it a 10, right? And not surprisingly, I'm up here. It's not a good time to be a perfect 10. It's the only time that it's not good to be a perfect 10 is on this scale right here. Research shows both in rats and in humans. And in my lab on food addiction, it's exactly this way as well, specifically when it comes to food, that 1/3 of the population is low, in terms of their susceptibility. They're just not pulled in they can take it or leave it. At the end of a heavy meal, they might want one bite of a dessert. The rest is, oh, too rich, too sweet. No, I'm full. I'm good. And then they probably don't want any sugar for a couple of days because that meal was really rich, and they want to eat light for a couple of days. That's how they naturally are. And 1/3 of people are moderate on the susceptibility scale. They're no stranger to cravings. They're no stranger to times when they, feel like they eat too much and lose control over their eating. Yeah. And then 1/3 of the population are like me. They're high on the susceptibility scale. We're talking maybe some binging in the mix. We're talking a lot of food obsession, what I've eaten or not eaten, whether I'm on my plan or off my plan, like too much thinking about all that. And like this feeling of not feeling satisfied. Research shows that a lot of people have lost the feedback mechanism that actually makes you stop eating when you've eaten a right-sized portion of food. That thing that keeps your head and your brain and your tummy like all and your mouth all aligned, where when you've had enough food, you don't want to eat anymore. For me, when I've had enough food, my belly is good with that, but my brain and my mouth, they want more food. Like I want to keep eating. And what I do is I shut my stomach up. Like I don't even want to hear, I'm really stuffed right now. Like I know I'm stuffed, but I still need to eat more food. So quantities become an issue then too. There's a quantities issue. So is this addictive susceptibility genetic or environmental? Well, as we know with these rats, there's definitely a genetic component. It turns out, these rats genetically don't have leptin, but the other way that it's genetic is that there's a certain predisposition to addiction that's been demonstrated in rats. Remember, I just said 1/3 of rats are not susceptible, 1/3 are moderately susceptible, and 1/3 are highly susceptible. Turns out that that's genetic. If you take rats who are addictable and you breed them with other addictable rats, you almost always get addictable rats. And similarly, if you breed the non-addictable ones with the non-addictable ones, you almost always get non-addictable rats. But here's what they found out. They took a couple of rats that were non-addictable. They bred them together, but then they raised their baby rats in stressful conditions, like pulled them away from their mom and raised them in isolation, or made access to food really uncertain, so they were stressed out all the time. And a good number of them, not all of them, but a good number of them turned into addictable rats. So it turns out that it's partially environmental too. Stressful child rearing conditions can trigger the addictive response as well. Okay, well, that's a lot about the problem and the way the brain is blocking weight loss. Let's talk a little bit about the solution. So obviously, we need to take control of the brain to get it to work in your favor. It's been working against you for a long time, if you're anything like me, and it's exhausting. And the first part of the solution is to establish bright lines. Bright lines are clear, unambiguous boundaries that you just don't cross. So a bright line is like quitting smoking. When you quit smoking, you're not saying, well, I'm going to quit smoking unless I really want a cigarette, or I'm going to quit smoking except at parties. You say, I'm quitting smoking. I'm quitting smoking. And we kind of, as a society, we know that this is necessary. Like if our friend is smoking 2 or 3 packs a day and they get diagnosed with lung cancer, or for whatever reason they just want to get healthier, we don't start to talk to them about how they're going to work to moderate their cigarette consumption, right? It's silly. We don't help people moderate their cigarette consumption. We help them to quit smoking. Similarly, an alcoholic needs to not drink anymore. And, there's some debate about that. But certainly if someone in our society these days at New Year's Eve holds up their hand in the stop sign, like, no thanks, for the glass of champagne, that gets respected now. Like if they say, I don't drink, no thanks. It's like, oh, okay, let's get you some sparkly water, or, whatever. But bright lines for food need to start to be respected as well, because many of us have a brain where the one piece of pizza experiment, it just never goes well. Like when I promise myself I'm going to eat 1 piece of pizza, it's always 2 or 3 or 4 or the whole box or whatever. And that's not an experiment I need to do anymore, because I know it's not going to go well, right? So for me, a bright line for pizza is way easier. That's the thing. It's easier Just like ultimately, like I quit smoking a while back, and now I'm a non-smoker. I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to smoke cigarettes today. I know I'm not smoking any cigarettes today. I'm a non-smoker. So bright line eating goes a long way towards solving this problem. So in bright line eating, we create a bright line for sugar and flour. And I know that that sounds crazy at first, but I promise you, there's so much to eat without sugar and flour. There's so much good, delicious, wonderful food. And what happens when you create a bright line for sugar and flour and you start to eat, instead of packaged, processed junk food, you eat whole, real food, your insulin comes down really fast. And that means that your leptin gets on board. And that means that suddenly you're not hungry and you feel like moving. You're feeling happy and you feel like moving. It's amazing. And it's a fast response. And you stop flooding the brain with dopamine. So now your dopamine receptors start to heal and replenish, which means your cravings subside. And I'll tell you, in the Bright Line Eating Bootcamp, in just 8 weeks, we've got almost 90% of people saying that their food has gotten easy and they have little to no cravings anymore at all. It's amazing. It's amazing how fast the brain can heal. Now, of course, it takes a system, because you can't just stop eating sugar and flour and go on your merry way because of the willpower gap, right? Like, how are you actually going to do that long term? So what you need next is you need to be walked through a comprehensive system to take the load off of willpower. So the system includes bright lines, yeah, but you're not going to be able to stick to those on your own, right? Because of the willpower gap. So the solution to the willpower gap, which I promised that I would tell you, remember, I said I'll address this later. I'm going to address it right now. The solution to the willpower gap is to implement planning and preparation and support. So what you're going to do is you're going to ultimately train your brain to eat from a different part of the brain, not the part of the brain that's making choices on the fly, that anterior cingulate cortex that gets so exhausted from checking email and dealing with your kids and sitting in traffic. You're going to execute eating instead from the basal ganglia. This is the part of your brain that helps you brush your teeth twice a day, every day. You brush your teeth even when you're tired, even when you're traveling. It doesn't matter. You brush your teeth, right? Now, 5% of people don't actually get that one super dialed in, but you could if you wanted to. If you don't, it's because you argue with yourself about it. And if you took the argument out of the mix, you would quickly turn into the 95% of people who brush their teeth twice a day. So the way we do that so automatically is it's an automatic action sequence. The same way we drive a car, it just becomes automatic. And breakfast, lunch, and dinner can become completely automatic just like that. And I love teaching people how to do it so that you get real, true habits on board. This is the solution ultimately, is habits. Habits, habits, habits. So I've been teaching people about this for a long time. I spent 20 plus years in various 12-step food programs. If you've ever been in a 12-step food program, you hear the roots of that. 12-step food programs are absolutely the ancestry of bright line eating. And I bow my body, tip my hat, mixing metaphors there, to the various 12-step food programs that I have been a part of for 20 plus years. And they work. They're great. There's, it's tricky to find a home in them. In my experience, that you got to kind of find a really good sponsor and a good set of meetings. But I spent over 20 years in various 12-step food programs, and I designed and taught my college course on the psychology of eating, including the neuroscience of food addiction. And in 2014, in my morning meditation, I got this, it felt like a message, like a mandate, but what my brain said to me was, write a book called Bright Line Eating. And a short time later, I started an email list to start getting some of the information out into the world that I wanted to share. And that email list grew and it grew and it grew. And since then, almost 1 million people have signed up for that email list through one shape or form. Not everybody's still on it, but there's a pretty big worldwide tribe now of people who are under the Bright Line Eating umbrella. And in 2014, the first few hundred people that signed up, they were emailing me back and asking questions like, how do I know where I'm at on the susceptibility scale? And I'm traveling. How do I eat? And what exactly is the food plan? And I've got kids. How do I cook for my family? And how do I navigate restaurants? And oh my goodness, I could tell as a professor really quickly they needed a course. And so I threw together the first Bright Line Eating Bootcamp, and I offered it at the end of 2014. And Lyndon Morris Del Rio was in that first boot camp. She was heavier than this. She's like me. She doesn't have a picture of her at her heaviest. She was 188 pounds. And she's now been in a right-sized body for years. She's 5'8", 125 pounds, hasn't gained back an ounce. The results so far of the boot camps, we keep offering the boot camps. We offered just that one at the end of 2014, and then in 2015 we offered one in February, one in June, one in October. In 2016 we offered one in January, one in February, one in March, then one in June, then one in October. And it just marches on, right? It just marches on. And tens of thousands of people have participated now from 103 countries around the world, because it's entirely online. It's not a boot camp that you have to travel anywhere to show up to. It's just delivered online. We hold your hand online virtually, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home in your bunny slippers. People have collectively lost 300,000 pounds now. 17 pounds per person on average. That average has been totally steady. And I want to say that our research program shows that that's steady across age groups too. So whether you're in your 50s or 60s or 20s, it doesn't matter. Premenopausal, postmenopausal, doesn't matter. 17 pounds on average. Almost all maintain their weight loss after the boot camp. We have a follow-up program. Over time, so far, approximately 45% of people are getting all the way down to their goal weight. Those who aren't are mostly stopping following the bright lines, not surprisingly. And of those who get to goal weight now, 87% are still there. I just want to remind you of the statistics I presented at the beginning of this webinar. Do you see how different? Yeah, just shockingly different. And I'm sharing all this with you right now because we're opening registration for the bootcamp again. It's an 8-week course. There's lots of structure, lots of support, lots of scientific grounding, 100% online. And I just want to share with you a little bit about what's involved. And then I'm going to share some more statistics from the bootcamp. It's pretty cool. You get the rapid release weight loss system. That's the system that I used to lose 60 pounds in 6 months, and that thousands of others have used to lose all their excess weight and keep it off. It works for omnivores. It works for paleo eaters. It works for plant-based eaters. It works if you're sugar, oil, salt-free. It works for gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, diabetics, if you've had bariatric surgery. Really, there's no form of special food needs that we haven't seen and that we can't work with. Really, truly anything. It doesn't matter. It's a very customizable, adaptable food plan. There are also customized care weekly group coaching calls for all of those 8 weeks. All the calls will be recorded, so you can receive your training and support at your ideal time, or you can show up live for sure. You can send in questions ahead of time if you can't make the call, and we can answer them on the call. The bootcamp also includes right away, when you sign up, you get the Clean Start process, where you get started with your food plan and form the habits that will ensure your long-term success. I know that for a lot of people, they're concerned that their mindset will trip them up. So we have the Mastering Mindset module, so your inner gremlins don't sabotage your progress. And of course, people get concerned, what if I fall off track? I don't know if I can do this perfectly. And the answer is, we don't expect perfection. We expect you to be unstoppable, not to be perfect, which means that you are going to need to resume. Potentially, if you break your bright lines, our Simply Resume system is right there for you, so you can get back on track if you cross the bright lines. We have a very loving, now a lot of people never cross their bright lines. They're just tootling along. It's been years now, and literally they just haven't, because the food plan works. It's very simple, and once your habits become automatic, you don't need to eat anything. You're good. You're totally good. You can eat out, all of it. But in my opinion, the best part of the bootcamp is the online connection and conversation community. This is a private online community for support every hour, every day, every minute. It's the best way to handle temptations is to go in there and get support. You can post questions and get answers and feedback literally 24/7. 24/7, 365. And you can share the journey with people from around the world who are 100% committed, who have got your back. So I want to talk a little bit about the investment. There's two methods for doing Bright Line Eating. The first method is to do it one-on-one with an amazing Bright Line Eating coach. We have several Bright Line Eating coaches, including myself, on staff who can work with you. And the investment to do that is $7,000. My investment is actually $50,000. My rates have gone up. I'm almost unhireable now. It's ridiculous. But my other coaches on staff are $7,000, and we will walk you through all of these systems and modules and the clean start process that I just described. And if that's the way you want to go, you go to the web to support.brightlineeating.com. That's where you need to go, support.brightlineeating.com. Or you can go through the same materials, get access to all the same systems in a group format, doing the boot camp like I've described for just $497. So what I'm going to do right here is make the offer available to you. So you should be able to click on it. Do you see right over here it says ready to go? It's time to get happy, thin, and free. Register for the Bright Line Eating Bootcamp now, secure my spot now. Right there, if you click there, that's where you get to register. Now, if you choose to do the bootcamp, because the bootcamp is starting, you get an amazing additional bonus package with 7 special bonuses as well. So let me tell you about those. First of all, immediately when you register, you get excerpts from the official Bright Line Eating cookbook. This is the only cookbook that is official for Bright Line Eating, and it's going to be published in October of 2019, so October 22nd of 2019. But when you register, you get advanced excerpts from this official cookbook. So that's going to help you make recipes and get started with your food plan super fast. In addition, you get the goal weight guidance system. This is really critical. A lot of people don't know what their goal weight is or how to figure it out, especially if they were heavy as a kid. And so maybe they've never been in a right-sized body, or maybe it's been so long since they were in a right-sized body, or maybe they're of an age where they're like, is it really realistic for me to get back into that size? And the goal weight guidance system explains all of that. It's a system for figuring out what your right-sized body is. In Bright Line Eating, we're very particular that you get to decide. We're not here to force you to be thinner than you want to be. But at the same time, we want you to know what your goal weight is. So we have a system for helping you figure that out. We also give you the 5-minute meals menu. This is a guide for making meals fast. I have 3 kids, and so it's super important to me that people understand that while there is some food prep involved with Bright Line Eating, there definitely is a way to get meals on the table really fast. And similarly, people get concerned that healthy meals are expensive. In Bright Line Eating, we have a lot of data on this. Actually, doing Bright Line Eating is way less expensive than any other method of eating. The average boot camper finds that their grocery bill goes down by 33% when they start Bright Line Eating, and their restaurant bill goes down even more. And if you're super budget conscious, the $5 meals guide will teach you how to eat so economically it will blow your mind, and delicious food too. Then there's the Meals on the Move travel tips. This is a package that really guides you in how to do Bright Line Eating successfully when you travel. And it takes into account all different kinds of trips, including road trips, short trips where you're in a hotel, short trips where you use an Airbnb, long trips, cruises, everything you could imagine. And then a lot of people are worried that they'll get tripped up at special occasions like holidays, or in particular around social gatherings like potlucks or dinner parties. And the surviving special occasions system not only teaches you how to navigate the food at such events, but teaches you how to navigate the social interactions. So you know what to say really comfortably. Yeah, you're not worried going into the social situation because you know exactly what you're going to say and do. And then finally, the effortless eating out system, because let's face it, we have to be able to eat out, otherwise it's not going to be sustainable. And this system walks you through doing bright line eating in every type of restaurant, no matter the cuisine. So it's a very comprehensive system. Now, I know that lots of people have tried everything before. I had tried everything too, including running that marathon and that bikini body challenge and probably 50 other diets that I had tried. And if you're a little bit shell shocked from all that, and maybe you're one of the people who've promised themselves that they'll never try anything again because nothing works, I want to give you a 30-day money back guarantee. My guarantee to you is if you give Brightline Eating a try, you watch the modules, you use the tools, you get support, and if it's not a fit for any reason, anytime in the first 30 days, you can have 100% of your money back. Boom. Just 100% of your money back. If you're wondering, does this really work? I just want to say it does, and then some. History is being made here at Brightline Eating. We're doing something that's never been done before. The shocking truth is, and almost no one knows this, but scientists do and obesity researchers do, there is not a single scientific peer-reviewed paper that has been published in any journal that shows any weight loss program taking any cohort of people, any group of people, and helping them to get down to goal weight, let alone stay there. Not one. But Brightline Eating is doing it. Brightline Eating is making history. In April, research findings on Brightline Eating were presented at the Experimental Biology Conference in Chicago, at the session on energy balance, macronutrients, and weight management. We published that. Follow-up research will be presented again this next April. We have a paper submitted for publication on Brightline Eating and more on the way, another paper in preparation on our follow-up research. We are doing something that has never been done before. And I want to show you some of what we're experiencing here at Brightline Eating. This is Jan Deutsch, who used to be 333 pounds. And she does Brightline Eating, and for years now, she's been at 141 pounds. Not a single pound regained. This is Susan Mast, who lost all her excess weight and lives at 107 pounds. Karina Flora, who lost all her excess weight and is now living at 131 pounds. We've got Jillian Appleton, who was morbidly obese in her 20s and has lost all her excess weight. We've got Peter Von York, who used to be above 300 pounds, got down to 210 by himself by doing a whole food plant-based diet, couldn't get below 200 and stay there by himself, and now is living for years at 150 pounds with Brightline Eating. And you might be thinking, well, that's them, but will I be able to do it? And the answer is yes, and it gets easier. It gets easier and easier and easier. Why? Most diets get harder. Brightline Eating gets easier because you get your brain on board. Your insulin levels are going to come down. Your dopamine receptors will replenish. Your willpower muscle will literally strengthen just by doing Brightline Eating. We have research that shows this. The willpower, that anterior cingulate cortex, will strengthen by doing Brightline Eating. Your habits will become automatic, and before you know it, you'll be thinking, this is easy. You will literally rewire your brain for food freedom. And so here's the thing. Our research program shows that at the end of the boot camp, almost 90% of people say that their eating has gotten easier and that they are confident or extremely confident that they will reach their goals. They've lost already on average 17 pounds and they're on their way, and they know it. They totally know it. Their cravings have gone down. Their hunger has gone down. And in almost every other diet in the world, hunger and cravings go up when you start the diet because they don't have you eating, whole real foods without the drugs in them. But the real transformation, I think, is best captured in this picture right here. It's really about how we feel about ourselves at the deepest level. It's about our confidence. It's about reclaiming ourselves, reclaiming our lives. It's about letting go of the food issue, the weight issue, so that we can finally be who we were meant to be in this world and give our gifts fully to the world. So here we are, and I just want you to take a moment here and imagine yourself finally living happy, thin, and free. Finally, when I finally got into a right-sized body after my weight climbing all through my 20s, I honestly felt like an 8-year-old girl who'd been told by Walt Disney himself that I got to be Cinderella and live in the magic kingdom and the magic castle in the magic kingdom. I really thought, like, I couldn't believe, like, I felt my body, my hip bones, my waist, and I just thought, are you kidding me? I get to finally live happy, thin, and free? I want you to imagine yourself finally living happy, thin, and free. Finally. And then just step out. Just take a bet on yourself. There's no risk. You can have your money back if it doesn't work. I want you to register for the Bright Line Eating Bootcamp now and join the world's most successful weight loss maintainers. I want to thank you for attending. Thank you so much for the privilege of your attention. Thank you so much for joining me. I love spending this time with you. And here's to your food freedom.